correct to me. And I just want to make sure that we're all clear about it. So I think the first was the recognition that our psychology is complex. And however we want to, however we want to explain the complexity, it's crucial that we keep it in mind that we're creatures with multiple desires and loves, and these desires and loves are of different kinds. They're not. It's not just like some people like vanilla and other people like chocolate. It's rather that appetitive desires are fundamentally different in their structure from spirited desires. So an appetite is just directed onto some bit of the world. A spirited desire takes into account other people's attitudes to your desires. As soon as you want to please another person, you have to have a much more complicated psychology to do that, because you have to be able to represent them separately from yourself and then attribute desires to them different than the ones you attribute to yourself. So you have very complicated, it's a very complicated task, and it arrives fairly late in the development of children, but they're able to see the difference between themselves and the other, and then to represent the inner states of other people. So that's very important. Then the other is that we do have a deep desire to understand ourselves in the world. This is a different one again. Right? So the first is just directly for some sort of object in the world that sparks your desire, maybe to avoid an unpleasant condition, maybe to have a pleasant one, maybe whatever it is, to eat food, drink, sex, whatever. But rational desires are different. Rational desires are, in part, desires like this, right? You want to not just desire something or desire to please another person, but you want to understand why it is or whether it's worthwhile desiring those things. That's a real step away, right? Notice the difference is your desires on the first part just set you goals, right? Eat that, please that, right? They're just like that. But now we can think this, right? And this is a huge step. We can think, should I desire that? Right? I do desire it, but should I? Should I satisfy it? Why do I have these desires? Where did they come from? Is it good to have them? Would I be better off without them? What should my attitude be to myself as somebody who has these kinds of desires? And then that just ramifies, because once we start to try to understand ourselves and why we have the desires we do, we don't know where that project of self-understanding ends or begins. Right? We don't know where it will lead us. How much of the world do we have to understand ourselves? Well, we're pretty late arrivals on the evolutionary scene. We're very complicated animals. So, right, that might require us to understand, Freud, Darwin, Marx. You pick your favorite thinkers. A lot of cognitive science, a lot of evolutionary psychology. Where will that end? Well, in a way, you might say, we have no idea where it ends. We've taken a lot of steps since Plato was writing 2,500 years ago, but we're still aware that we're still very limited in our knowledge, even of how our own brains work, right? How the world works that we're a part of. But our projects have this amplifying side to them, right? So you think, I'll give you a very simple example. You think nothing of filling up your car with gas, right? We do it all the time. Then if you start thinking, you think, where does the gas come from? Who drills for it? Where is it refined? Are the political regimes that organize its production ones that I want to be supporting by, what I pay? And then should we be burning fossil fuels at all? Is the globe really heating up? Right, these questions just the more we know, the more we realize that even very simple choices like diet, what to eat, have further consequences, not just for our own health, but for the health of the planet and the world. So when we decide that we're going to be serious meat eaters, we also decide that a lot of surface of the earth will be giving over to grazing cattle, which will produce an incredible amount of methane and other gases, which will contribute to, you know, it never ends, right? So a great example, I think, is if you were thinking that you should be a good person, you know, in this regard, and you think that you should be a vegetarian, and then you start to realize that almost all the vegetables are going to be trucked in from California. You know, there's not a simple recipe for how to live a good life, and the more you know, the harder it is, because you recognize more and more about the consequences of your decisions than you did when we were all innocent. Right? We didn't know that any of these things were bad for us. When I was a kid, we used to play with asbestos, right? We had DDT, we'd put it on everything. Nobody knew. We smoked cigarettes, right? Even though, right, eventually, it took not too long to discover that all of these things were seriously bad for us. So when we think about that third kind of desire, we recognize understanding ourselves leads us to all kinds. So quite different from wanting the approval of others or wanting some particular thing. Yeah.
Something you said a few minutes ago about like how you should feel about yourself, or like judge yourself based on the desires that you have.
Yeah.
It just made me think, like, if these desires are something that you can't control, where does that take you? Like, if you have an uncontrollable desire about something that is like bad or stigmatized, then where does contemplation about how you should feel about yourself take you? Because you can't change it, or you just end up in almost like self-loathing or something.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And you know, in a way, it's part of one of life's, how would you put it? Well, depending on what it is, tragedies or comedies, right? That the world may not accommodate our desire, may tell us that all we can do with that is repress it or be ashamed of it or satisfy it in secret or whatever it is. And sometimes you want to say, well, about some of those desires, that's right, they need to be repressed or controlled or satisfied only in fantasy or something like that. Whereas about others, what you want to say is, no, the world should change so that I can satisfy those. And part of what is we recognize is that with growing insight, desires that used to be shameful or were thought shameful don't seem shameful anymore. So if you like, knowledge can liberate us from oppressive custom, right? It can tell us, no, that was stupid, right? The idea that women were unfit to be part of the work world, or that they didn't have what it takes to vote, or they couldn't be in politics, or couldn't get a higher education because of their nature, just now seems preposterous. I mean, all you want to do is laugh when you hear it, right? But to get there required massive political struggle, but also actual empirical research to say, no, you know, I just watched a film by the Indian filmmaker Sanjeev Ray called, it's based on an Ibsen play, The Enemy of the People. And in it, a doctor discovers that the water coming from the sacred temple is polluted with bacteria, and that's why everybody is getting sick. But the religious can't believe that holy water could be contaminated with anything, and that becomes a massive. Of course, we can see it today, the very same struggle, where, you know, we're politically, in a way that I think probably 10 years ago I'd have thought impossible, that science is under attack because it tells us things we don't like to hear. Right? And what a lot of the things it tells us is that we can't keep doing these things, or the consequences are going to be terrible. And some people's reaction is to say, well, so much the worse for science, then let's get rid of it. Yeah.
So I have a question about a section on page 100, and then as you can thing later.
Yeah.
So this is, it's on 100 to 73D. It's the thing about, like, we must realize that each of us is ruled by two principles in which we follow wherever they lead. One is our inborn desire for pleasures, the other is our acquired judgment, which is the best. And then a little bit down he says, now when judgment is in control and leads us by reasoning towards what is best, that sort of self-control is being in your right mind. And then later he talks about like there's the myth of like the horses and whatever, and like they see the place of being. So that seems, so the difference here to me is between truth and knowledge, and it seems that like is between truth and knowledge, and it seems that like, I don't know, if you gaze upon the place of being or you find some way to like have it be possible through reason, like that's kind of seeing truth. But like here he says like judgment is like a kind of knowledge that like processes things with reasoning, and it's not necessarily truth. I don't know if this is wrong.
No, I don't think that's right. Knowledge always has to be true, I think, in Plato, just as it is for us. But I think that one of the things that Plato does think is that when we try to express knowledge in words, we lose something. So there's a thought of the direct, so you might think of it this way. Say, trying to express what it is you know or believe, right, can be a difficult task. Plato thinks there's always a step away from what you see, right, intellectually, the intellectual grasping out on the truth, to when you try to put it into words. So the grasp could be correct, but you're putting it into words, manages to take a step away from the vision. But part of the story that he's telling there is very much the story which is probably why you picked it out. It's very much part of the story that I was telling, right? Which is that, so the first part, I think, is for Plato to realize that our psychology is complicated. I mean, even if we think it's even more complicated than Plato thought it was, we have to think that it's at least as complicated as he thought it was, because we can see that those three different kinds of desires have very different psychological and social roles, right? What we want to consume, the approval of others, self-understanding, which involves a critical or reflective attitude towards our other desires. Those are all quite different. And I think the other is this one, that once we recognize that our psychology is complicated, we also have to recognize that things can be, like love, for example, can be differently represented in different psychological organizations. So one kind of psyche loves in one way, and another kind of psyche loves in another way, and a third kind loves in a third way. And love has to be understood as something that while it may have continuities across the three kinds, has very different styles of loving, depending on which kind of psychology it's in. So if the lover is an appetitive person, then their love tends to be a appetitive or appetized love. It tends to operate like to own, possess, consume, right, with a focus on pleasure and that. And we all recognize that, right? It's not as if we think, gee, that's weird. No, that seems right. That there's a kind of love that is like that. And as I want to say, it might not be the best kind of love, but in some things you might say, good, like food, right? Good food is better than bad food, but bad food is better than no food at all. In the same way, a love that's less than the best might be a lot better than none. And most of us have to settle in life for a love that's short of the best, I think. So next one would be, a love that's in the psychology of someone for whom approval is immensely important. So imagine that you're in a relationship with someone like that. So the first sort of person, right, the appetitive person, might not care that much whether you approve of him or her, right? That's not where the action is for them, right? So if you're upset with them or disapproving of them, well, as long as you still sleep with them and everything and the sex is good, maybe they don't care about that. But the other sort of person is very sensitive to the attitude that you have and the attitude that you have to their desires and so forth. And so for them, it's very important that you can turn them off just by not looking warm towards what they've suggested they'd like to do or whatever you can. There's a lot of room for control of a person who cares about what you think about them. And of course, we don't have to think that it's all one or the other, right? There are plenty of degrees in between. Maybe everybody cares a little bit, right? That's the sort of thought. Okay, so those are the two big thoughts that I want to happen. I think that they're the beginning of wisdom about thinking about love, which is, so that's why the project for your writing part of the course is to think about what love is directed to. But if there's a complex psychology, that's not a simple answer. Right? There's no, right, it's not just like it's directed to Bob, but it's directed to Bob as somebody, right, with a certain kind of psychology. But then, so because what you're going to be thinking is, what is it to love, to be loved for yourself? What is it to love another person for themselves, for who they are? What does that mean? What are we thinking about? And then we realize that there might not be one simple answer to that. Rather, there might be styles of answer depending. Yeah.
I think the contemporary Western answer to this is like the love languages and how you get to, like, you know, pick yours and you pick your partners and then you like realize, oh, you have like the one that you like to like the outward directed and the receiving end one. And it's like, I think, a very elementary expression of this idea that like the way you love is directed by your psychology or your like personal outlook.
Yeah, but I mean, it seems quite right. I mean, doesn't it? I mean, the thought is that in a way, what you want in a love relationship, since you want to be loved for yourself, is a love that's particularized, personalized to you. And, well, we're very intricate beings. And just how all those intricate elements in us are woven together is not a simple matter to see. So, I mean, for some people, right, you have to, if you're treading into this particular territory, you better tread very gently, because that's one that galvanizes defenses and angers and other kinds of reactions. And that's not something where you can come head on. You have to kind of go around. In the chapter of Love's Confusions about Forster's novel, Howard's End, you see a little story about the delicacy and tact that can be required in dealing with somebody who's got certain kinds of insecurities or certain kinds of very deeply loved aspects of themselves that they don't like to feel criticized. So you move into that territory critically, you gotta pull back. And then you're wasting your time. As soon as that happens, everything you say after that is pointless. You just shut the door to reception of messages. And I think we've all encountered that, right, where suddenly something has gone wrong, there's a break, we can't re-establish connection, we're not being effective communicators, we get upset ourselves, we get anxious, we make stupid moves. All of this is part of an intimate relationship. And, right, so the land to be charted is a very complicated one, and usually over time, if you're lucky, you get better at it. And that may mean simply that certain kinds of things you just don't deal with. Not every relationship can deal with everything. And no particular reason why it should be able to deal with everything. Yeah.
What I'm thinking though is that, like, for example, let's say like you fall in love with someone to like kind of like quench that appetite, you're a very evident person, right?
Yeah.
And then you get with them, you get married, and then after 10 years, like, you want something else, like in terms of like you want someone that's like, I don't know, that boosts your ego, something different, right?
Yeah.
And so, but like, there's a lot of people that'll be like, yeah, I want something else, but I really love this person, so I want to make it work.
Yeah.
So when they say like, I really love this person, what is that love?
Well, I don't think there was one answer, but there was one thought that it's easy not to have, so maybe I'll put it into the mix. Changes in ourselves as members of a relationship or anything, those changes are not just things that happen to us. They happen to us in part because of the relationship we're in. And we don't just change arbitrarily, right? We change together with the other person. In fact, that's part of what a good relationship is. So, but of course it can happen that people, as we say, grow apart. And that is, they find themselves with different goals, even though they don't plan on that, right? As rather that maybe one career leads in one direction and another leads to another, and then they're faced with choices that put pressure on their multiple affections and so on. And I think what you want to say then is, well, some relationships break, and other relationships is you say you really love the other person, but really loving the other person doesn't mean you necessarily want to live with them. Right? It can be that you recognize that your love has nowhere to go together. That doesn't mean that you stop being concerned about them or wanting to take care of them or other things, but that might not be something you can do by living with them. And on the other hand, it can be that what you do is go to a marriage counselor or whatever, and you say, we want to stay together, but we've got these problems, we don't know how to handle them. Is there a way? And sometimes a wise counselor can say, you're focused too much on this. You're holding that fixed, it's screwing up everything. Don't that, right? Sell the house, then you won't have these mortgage problems, then you won't have these, right? Sometimes that's just what it takes. You can turn around and escape. But anyway, there's no particular answer, I think, something like that.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
And to go off of that, I just think sometimes, especially in different relationships, you
Yeah.
might need something from someone that helps you both move on to a different place, that you no longer need that thing. So if you need them to stroke your ego and you're with them for a while and you
Yeah.
get past that place
Yeah.
where you need that, and then you might need something else more from another person.
Yeah, I think too, I think that's absolutely right. I think another one, by the way, which I explore a little bit of in the last, very speculative chapter of Love's Confusion, says that maybe the part of what we're seeing is that the idea of coupledom, that idea that was tied to romance and the one other and the nuclear family and the bringing up of children and all of that stuff, that maybe that's no longer, that's the fixed point we need to give up, right? So the thought would be, instead of looking for all of the things that we want in our lives from one person, maybe we can divide and conquer. And after all, we've changed our minds about quite a few things. But I mean, let's take an example. So if we look at the heyday of marriage, right? So I'm thinking of the period, right, probably of affectionate marriage, of the kind of marriage, what we think of, where people are now looking for love and other things besides security and so on. So really looking from the period after the First World War to around the beginning of the 60s. That was the heyday of this idea of marriage, in part for all kinds of reasons, some of which we looked at about economics and so on, how it worked out. But that went hand in hand with, for example, considerable tolerance of male infidelity. Okay? So as this kind of marriage still does. America is a wee bit puritanical about this, but Europeans don't have they think, oh, of course men have mistresses, right? That's part of what makes a marriage work, right? Men have these kind of sexual needs and desires. They can't always satisfy them with their wives. They outsource that. It's not a big deal. The family's not threatened. This doesn't lead to divorce. This is just, right, a way of dealing with different kinds of desiring economies, right? Different one, right, which is probably happening, is that we are all a bit more tolerant of that, right? That is, we don't see sexual infidelity as the kind of biggest game in town, the worst kind of infidelity. It all depends, right? And as women go out of the house far more than they used to and go on business trips and have more money of their own, you can expect to see this happening more. In fact, we know it happens because we can see that women have far more children by men they're not married to than we thought if we look at the genes. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a New York Times article a couple of days ago about how the people who are in the happiest marriages actually live their lives they're single people, they have bigger groups of friends, they see them more, so it's they're looking for things, they're looking for support, not just sexual things outside of the marriage, because they can't rely on their partner for everything.
And so I took the sexual one because that was the kind of big one. I think it still is a complicated one. As we're trying to work out styles of sexual lives that are consistent with being in a relationship with someone, having children with them, and raising a family, where the sexual part, whatever we do to satisfy that, doesn't threaten the relationship, and that seems like a bit of wisdom to me. But then there are others, and you're quite right, like where, and this is far more easily solved for men. Okay, so imagine that everybody's living in the suburbs. So you have to sort of think about, this is changing too, right? People are moving into the cities. Everybody lives in the suburbs. And the guy goes out to work in the morning, the mother stays at home and does what exactly, right? So it can be very difficult even to form networks of friends. Everyone has to drive everywhere to do anything. It's all a pain in the ass, right? Just really big pressures are put. So, but increasingly, those people aren't living that way. Everyone's going out. I think that you'd expect to see, and we are seeing, thoughts like the one that was in that New York article, the New York Times article, which is, a relationship is an economy. It's just like the economy of a nation, right? We import lots of stuff. We export things. We outsource. And a relationship can do those things too, provided that people have the skills to handle what's involved. And so for example, envy and jealousy, especially sexual jealousy, which can be powerful corrosives in a relationship, in which men are far more prone to them. Males in general, and females in general, not just in our species, but in animal species too. Just watch if the birds have all come out because the spring is starting, and just watch male cardinals police the territory of their females. You'll see the little, kind of orange-billed female puttering around like that, and up on the tree you'll see the male. Right. Well, he doesn't want to be bringing up the offspring of some other damn bird, right? So he's policing during the period of fertility. This well studied, this fascinating stuff. Males do the same. Yeah, human males do the same. They were, even if right now you're not thinking, gee, I don't want to be bringing up somebody else's child. Few of us have those kinds of explicit thoughts, but our reactive attitudes are as if, right, just like other males. Male lions kill all the offspring of a previous male if they get a chance to, right? Because we're geared naturally to have a huge concern about our offspring, even if, right, we've had to rethink all that, namely, but nonetheless, the kind of hard wiring, like for opioid addiction, love of fat and sugar, love of salt, all of these things are just wired into us by our evolutionary history, and we have to deal with it. It's a problem for us, right, because we can eat as much sugar as we want, and we shouldn't. But if we were out in the wilds, we wouldn't have to worry about getting them. Okay, so let's go back now and make sure that we're holding. So of course, these pictures of ourselves that Plato gives us, the tripartite soul, the styles of love, which he tries to allegorize in that picture of the charioteer, the black and the white horses, the followers of different kinds of gods. They're like this, right? To think of a competitive relationship, a good one, as making available certain kinds of goods to the people who are in it, but not other ones. So, Lescoffier, the great French cook, writing in the Encyclopedia Gastronomique, the first great thing about cooking, right, says two married gourmands, right, two people who are really into eating, have perfect reason to get together 3 times a day, right, when they eat. They are doing something that's really intrinsically very nice. They're eating really good food and drinking good wine. And over the wine, as they relax, they start to talk to each other, and and such chit-chat is full of charm. Right? So the thought is, you can have a very good life like that. Those really good things are made available in this relationship. But other kinds of good things are not. Right? Why? Well, you have to think about the fact that if you're busy eating and drinking and so forth, there are other things that you're not doing. That the relationship is built around one set of shared goods but not another. So sometimes, for example, couples find that their relationship is great until they have children, at which point the triangulation and the need to economize and do other things makes a previously good relationship turn bad. They're not well equipped to handle this. And they can be too selfish, for example. That can be, also they resent the fact that now they can't go out in the evening, that they don't have as much discretionary income, that there's a child that needs constant minding, and their relationship is not set up for that. It's a stressor for them. A different one, it's the solution. They needed something to work on together. Now they've got a little demanding child that they have to take care of. That's great, right, for them. So think of each kind of relationship as making available certain kinds of goods, or doing so better than it makes available other kinds of goods. Then the spirited couple, the couple who are into approval and honor and achievement and success, right? They have a different set of goods are made available to them, right? Their relationship is one in which they can get those goods pretty readily. They can give and get them. But there are others that it's harder for them to give and get. So you might think of a relationship as being sort of like this. I'll be heteronormative. So here's our couple, right? And they have, well, each have Psych 1, one kind of psychological organization. And that psychological organization is tied to a certain class of goods that are distributed to the couple because they're in the relationship. Okay. So you might think of it this way. Think of a standard problem of the economy of couples. Probably still a problem, but it's less one than it used to be. So we can think of the distribution of orgasms. I know that might seem a strange thing to do, but actually orgasmic pleasure is one of the great pleasures. And it's one of the reasons, or one of the good things about coupling. So, you'd ask, how is orgasmic pleasure distributed? And you might think, well, a very successful sexual couple, orgasmic pleasure will be distributed in one way, and a less successful one will be distributed in another way. So you could measure how good a sexual relationship you're having by how well sexual pleasure, including orgasmic pleasure, is distributed. That's just a way to think about it. Different one, and this is a huge one, not so much in our world, but in the third world. So these are appetitive goods, right? So we have orgasmic pleasure. And we could just call it sexual satisfaction if you want, but orgasmic pleasure is going to be part of it. There's a different one as calories. It's very easy to forget this, that food is one of the things that's distributed in a couple in the family. And one of the things we know is that women get a smaller number of those calories. It's the mother who sacrifices the calories to feed the children and so forth. And that in a land of plenty, that's not in rich families or in families that have no scarcity of food, that's not a problem. But for many families, and especially in the third world, it's a huge problem. So for example, if we look at the world population, even though there are more women than men, there are fewer women than there should be. And quite a lot fewer women than there should be. And one reason for that is malnutrition. It's the little girls get fewer of the calories and fewer of the good calories than the little boys do. You can see it, of course, in China, where the one child per family resulted in aborting far more female fetuses than male ones. So now there are going to be a lot of little Chinese boys looking for girls, and no Chinese girls for them to find. And that's going to be a premium for such Chinese girls as there are. There's going to be a scarcity of them, right? You see, you have to think this way. It's very easy to forget it, right? But all of these, so, we could put in money. So a standard problem, again, in 18th, 19th century novels is the male spends too much of the money on, gambling, drinking with his friends, doing stuff. And that puts pressure on the family to succeed when a big part of the male income goes to liquor. And of course, we all recognize that problem from millions of movies and stories and so forth. So that's a very important one. Very important fact that when women are the wage earners as opposed to men, for the very same reason that they tend to give more calories to children, they tend to spend more of their money on their children, on their welfare than men do. So that actually giving money to women is a better bet long term for families than it is giving it to men. And these are all really, and the more we know about them though, the more we can recognize and diagnose the problems, right? We can sort of think, we should be thinking about these things because they're very important. Right? And then we can go on, right? Their careers. So I'm thinking of all of these as sort of roughly appellate. Of course, there are big differences, but just for the simple story, right? What happens when career decisions have to be made? Are they made equally, or is it thought that the male's career is more important? Even if, from another set of points of view, it might be a less valuable career, right? It might be less important socially in other ways. But because it's the male's career and he's the head of the household and it's his, right? And that has one other one we'll just look up, and I think there's another one very easy to forget is breakup costs. I'm just going to keep them all in the appellative for now. You don't think about that because you don't think about breaking up when you start a relationship. But breakup costs are very important. So, for example, rich people make prenuptial agreements, as they know that the breakup costs could be substantial, so they want to make sure that we're all on board with this. You won't get a penny, or you'll get this much and no more. Sign here. Most people don't do that. In part, I think they feel it would be betrayal of love to sort of start talking about that kind of thing. What happens if we break up? But actually, the failure to talk about it disadvantages women. So men, coming out of a divorce, are within a year or two far better off than they were before. Women are far worse off, and that's true for a number of reasons. The women are usually given the children. Right, they're given maybe alimony and child support, but that can be irregular and be hard to get, and the courts are notoriously dilatory at enforcing these kinds of things. I think it's very important to think that way, that there's a kind of justice involved, intimate justice that's involved, and that some of the things that can be wrong with a relationship have to do with the injustices that are present. But people are not always aware of. Now we expand, so that's one. So now let's take the same, but then I'll do it in a different color so we can see it more vividly. So the same, another couple, and they have a different psychological organization. And they have a different set of goods. So I'm going to just take a very obvious one. Suppose they're both creative people. So they're both artists or dancers or musicians or whatever. And they don't actually care very much about how much money they've got or what social position they have or what other, they don't think I've got to have a nice car because the neighbors do, or I've got to clean the house because everybody does that. They're kind of more bohemian, and they live out there, sort of different kind of life together. And, they've got a different set of goods. Of course, they're going to have a lot of these because we're all appellate to some degree, but they're going to, value or weigh those things differently. Right? So when we go over here, we're going to get a different class of goods that are made. So what I want you to think about in a relationship, I think it's the beginning of wisdom about it, it's not this way. Do you love me? Am I right? Not all about this. It's this way. What goods does the relationship make available to both parties? If it makes available a huge number of goods, you've got a really good relationship, right? If it doesn't, then you're probably fretting around something else. You're thinking that, right, you're thinking something like this, right? It's something wrong with us, or we don't fit, or it's some other stuff, something that we could do by adjusting us. And I think that it's really often something, so over here maybe what you've got is, people are thinking like this, look, we're just gonna have rice and beans for the next month, is that okay? Because I wanna buy that painting, or I want to do this, they want us to go to these operas, or I want us to do this, or want us to go to Paris next week, or whatever, right? And over here, there's quite a different set of goods that are being made available, different sacrifices that are made. So here it's very important that the house be full of books, that there be lots of music, that there be films, that there be operas, that there be all these kinds of things made available. And the other stuff doesn't matter nearly so much. So it's not about, do I have nice clothes, do I eat, whereas different. And of course there are many. Plato gives us only the following thought, right? That a way to vividly see that this is an operation, not, if you like, a fully psychologically real version. It's a simplified model to get us to see the structure. It's not a fully articulate. We all have elements of all of these things, right, in real life. But to see the difference, and to see the difference that love makes in a psychology is really crucial bit of wisdom. So that's the stuff, that's what Plato is allegorizing, right, when he starts talking about, oh, you know, some people follow different gods. So the ones who follow Ares, right, are into honor, approval, winning, machismo, that kind of stuff, right? And that's what they want to achieve with their lovers, right? The others, the appetitive ones, no, they're happy with something else. They don't care about approval and all that stuff, they want something else. And the rational ones, the really best ones, the followers of Zeus, right? They want to incorporate their relationship into a full life in which all these goods are given their proper value. So the ideal one would, of course, be something like this, where we cut all the goods, well, in the right kind of way, with the right kind of weighting. What would we sacrifice for what? So that, well, what? So that our life together was filled with riches, good things. If that's true, if your life together is filled with good things, and among them are, you know, of course, tenderness, you know, if that's important to you, affection, tenderness, loving regard, cuddling, you know, all of that stuff that can be very important. Well, those are all goods that are available too. So if one person really likes a lot of cuddling and affection and the other person doesn't, is really prickly, you've got a problem, right? Maybe you can solve it because other things are there and they're very important. But it can be incredibly important, right? And I think we often encounter this in things related to this. So sexual differences in sexual preferences can be actions, activities, whatever. It doesn't make any difference what it is. Those can be very decisive, in part because if people feel rejected sexually, that seems like a really big kind of rejection. And I think part of what you want to be vividly aware of is whether your own sexual preferences are serving you well overall as a person. So, you know, that. So suppose, for example, it's this. You just think, if I don't have good oral sex with somebody, then the relationship is just off. I don't want it at all. And so I think you can have two kinds of questions right about that. One is, should you find oral sex so important? And that's about how does it fit into a whole set of things. So I think part of it is, what if the other person doesn't like it? And how should you take that into account? Now, for some people, right, that's kind of as a deal breaker, right, or something like it. If we don't do that, I don't want a relationship with you. And part of, I think, what you want to be thinking is, right, not to think by fetishizing some particular thing, but to think, how does this play out in a whole set of other things? Are there other things we could do? How does your partner respond? Is it just they say, no, I don't like that, and that's it? Or they say, well, I don't like that, but there's some other things that I really like. Maybe we could explore some of those. That's also a response. I mean, this often comes up with food preferences, not just sexual ones, right? I love blah, you hate blah. What are we supposed to do? Hey, you know, this third thing, it's really great. We both love it. Why don't we eat that? That can solve a lot of problems. Okay, so you see what I'm on about? Yeah, okay. So now, let's talk a little bit. I wanted to get all that any thoughts that you want to have, or any particular bits in the symposium and the Phaedrus that you wanted to pick up on? Yeah.
Just kind of a thought on this. When you said that good relationships are those that make lots of goods available, I'm wondering if that means that all of those goods should be a product of the relationship itself, or or which ones it is important that be a product of the relationship.
Well, yeah, so some goods are they're achieved in the relationship. So good sex is, let's imagine, achieved in the relationship. Though it needn't be, as we saw, right? You might outsource that because other things are more important to you. Others, of course, like filling your lives with great art and books and stuff. You don't do that unless you're very lucky, married to Picasso. Right? Most have to import, as countries do, huge amounts of good things. And we're lucky in a way that I think it's just if we went back to the 19th century and told somebody about this, they would think they'd died and gone to heaven already. Just think that we can have carry around on our phone a huge selection of the world's great music and listen to it any damn time we want. Once upon a time, if you wanted to listen to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, you'd have to get a huge orchestra together, which you couldn't afford to do, right? And same with the world's great literature. You can get it for free, pretty much. The shit, you have to pay for that, but the really good stuff you can get for free, right? And so, that's a bliss of a sort, so that we can fill our lives, right, with these things. You don't even have to live in a university town with a great library. It's all online. It's amazing. I do it. I use it every day, and I think, gee, I would once upon a time have had to order this book, wait for 3 weeks until the library got it from wherever it is, right? Then look it up only to find that, no, it's not really relevant at all. And maybe I've even forgotten why I wanted it by then. Now it's 2 minutes. Amazing. So those things that's a huge source of wealth. And I think that if I can just riff on for a second about how important that is, the world of work is undergoing an immense change. Automation and robotization of things are changing the world faster than you can imagine that's happening. Right? And that means that the kind of work that we're going to do, that's the kind of work that people will be needed for, quite different kinds of work. So, for example, obviously nurses, carers, people who provide the kinds of services that only people can provide, those are going to ratchet up. But the other is we're all going to have a lot more free time. Now, consumer-based societies want us to use all that time spending money on stuff, but that's going to stop. That's really going to be a huge slowdown on that for all kinds of reasons, federal resources, pollution, and other things. And the fact that it's boring. Right? So really what we're going to want to do is produce people who can entertain themselves with things that are far better. The life of the mind that Plato and Aristotle both thought was what we should all be aspiring to anyway. Remember, they were leisured aristocrats. That's going to be within the grasp of more of us, provided that we're educated and trained to appreciate it. And there we have a massive problem, because our education system is not good. And there's we can do the statistics on it. It's really depressing to see how you're cheated out of your birthright. That's the way I look at it. The fact is that all that time that you spent in school, you could have been getting better and better at appreciating more and more of the goods that are in the world, right? And unless you were very lucky, you weren't getting as much of that as you should. And that's terrible. That's a way in which the political system has cheated you, may have impoverished you, so that now you have to do a lot to catch up. And well, not to go on too long about that, but it is a fundamentally depressing fact. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is maybe like taking this too far, but
Yeah.
just for discussion's sake. Yeah, I wonder if that's true, because like
What's the?
sorry, I wonder, or
Yeah.
it as in like the idea that will like shift, like the increase in automation will like shift
Yeah.
most of production to
Yeah.
like the life of the mine or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because like, I mean, as far as need is concerned, like we kind of solved most of the problems of
That's really a
of
distribution
society.
problem. We've got enough food to feed. We went, I think it's, I can't remember exactly what the number is, but it's $2,000 to $3,000. The average family wastes $2,000 to $3,000 worth of food a year. It just gets thrown out. And you know, if we had better distribution methods, with this, you know, even with the same amount of food that we produce, we could feed starving people. That's a huge issue, and again, another disappointment. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but I mean, I think the incredible, so I don't know, we could say, I don't know, Keynes did think about us having solved this problem in like the 30s or something.
Yeah.
But like the incredible thing that occurred like in economics over the past, like, I don't know, 8 years or so, doesn't have anything to do with the satisfaction of human need, but like in solving the problem of like the expiration of desire. So like the question ends up being like, oh, like, I mean, Nike shoes are a great example. Or Nike shoes are a great example of this, because you have, I mean, theoretically, how much aggregate production should be assigned to the shoe market?
Yeah.
Not much. Nike has kind of like
Yeah.
invested this, you know, like the base product with this kind of metaphysical aspect
Yeah.
that creates a huge amount of utility
Yeah.
and like makes
Symbolic value.
Yeah, but
It's huge. You'll pay $150 for a sneaker that's got the symbolic value that one you could have gotten for, you know, 125 if it didn't have the little swoop on it. Go, yeah.
Yeah, but like this ends up, I mean,
Yeah.
the trend seems towards more of this, and like that, like this
Well,
is
it could, that's right, it could go that way. I think that so part of what could happen is that we, get more and more embroiled in consumerism and fetishizing of small differences and proliferation of things and the artificial creation of more and more desires that are themselves, relatively speaking, appetitive. That is, they don't require a lot of sophisticated psychological investment. Think of the difference between, you were reading Propertius. Interesting choice, because not many people read Propertius. But to read Propertius in Latin, you need to know Latin. And to listen to sophisticated music, you need to spend time learning how to do it. Languages are the great example because it's just obvious, but you have to learn them if you want to read in them and so on. But that's true of if you want to understand a lot of science, you've got to learn a lot of science first. So when we look at that, the thought is, but then I'd have to educate you. In order to get you to have access to all kinds of goods, I'd have to put a lot of the social energy into educating you so you could access them. But if I think that educated people are hard to govern, they tend to have certain kinds of political preferences, they make for difficult citizens, they do all kinds of stuff, and really what we want are a whole lot of people who won't do that. Then decisions about how you'll be educated will feed into the same pattern of story. So the thought would be, don't do too much, because really what we want them to be is consumers who are not very politically active and not able to think too much about things. Yeah.
And I feel like some of those two goals kind of interfere with each other because we want lots of consumers, but yet there's a shift in like automation, and so there's not need for a lot of people to make money to be a consumer.
That's the part that I think is good. So one huge problem with the wealth shift is who's got the money to buy the consumer goods, and so that. Well, we don't have to, these are all speculative. The world could end before any of this stuff happens. Given the rate at which the North Pole is heating up, we may all be below water, next week or whatever. We come in and we have gondolas in New York. Only the upper floors, on waterfront property at last. You don't know, we don't know. These are all open questions. Let's back away from long-term speculation, but only to notice that, however we want to draw the picture of all of this, use one more color since I have it. However we want to think about all of this, we do have to think of it all this way. This part, easy to be forgotten, but never forgotten by Plato, right? It's always, Republic puts all this together, it's all about politics. Right, the idea is that you may not, in these relationships, looking at these spheres of goods, be thinking about politics at all. But everything that's going on in here is permeated by or tinged by the political system that you're doing it all in. So you may not be aware of it, but it is. How you think about each other, how you think about what's important in life, where you put your assets, these are all shaped in part by thoughts about politics. And that's why, right, somewhere in these, somewhere in the local, we have to make room for exit into the political. Right? So people who are narrow, who look this way and look at these goods and aren't thinking at all about the larger political things, may be okay, they may be having a really good relationship, but their relationship is vulnerable to political changes because they haven't been taking care, not just of themselves, but of the larger public sphere, which is crucial to the success of their continued success of their relationship. And that's something, again, where you want to say, yeah, when we think about what's really valuable and what should be in our lives, some of the things are in it are private goods. Maybe a lot of these are private goods. But many others, right, are public goods. And part of what has been going on, which is upsetting, is that the realm of public goods has been depleted relative to the realm of private goods. So just, read a Philip Roth novel. They're all good. And read about what public school was like right before the Second World War. And then think about what your public school experience was like. And then think the following. Right? That public education is free. Public schools are free. Well, free is a very bad market value. There's no money in free. Right? So but education is very important. So how do you make as much money out of it as possible? Well, one, make the free stuff bad. And make people have to pay to make up for the bad free stuff they got by spending a lot of money on other stuff, only some of which is good. So if you look at the statistics on university education, the stuff you're getting, even at a good school, and look at the statistics on income and output, right? Who knows what when they come in, who knows what when they go out, what have they acquired in the way of value? Again, you can see that even expensive public and private universities that it costs a lot to go to, that you will get into debt in, right, aren't doing as well by you, so to speak, as they could. And that has effects on these, right? I mean, we bring to a relationship with another person, right, our socialized, educated selves, and how well educated, socialized, and rich these selves are. It's not just our doing. We didn't make our full selves, right? Our families, our society, our schools, everything else helped to make them so, too. And if we don't have inner wealth, so to speak, to bring to a relationship, well, it's going to be very hard for the relationship itself to be rich, right? Because the people don't have much to bring to it. In the 19th century, people would say, well, the wealth was money. Now, how much money you brought to the relationship, that's really what was crucial to its success. Oh, I say, yes, that can be very important too. But so are all these other goods that we bring. If we don't have a rich array of them, our chances of having the kind of life that we want with another person go down substantially. Well, for the very reason I gave. We don't have that wealth of things to bring. So that's another part of what we have to think about when we think about how we're going to do our loving in a world is what have we got to bring to the table? What does the other, what can we do to make up for ways in which we're not as rich, so to speak, as we should be? Yeah.
Well, I think in terms of like the problem you brought up, like public schools and stuff like that, I think it's because like the incentive structure is like all wrong, and they become in a sense like
it's one way to put it.
yeah. I think
Yeah.
like in a sense they become anti-political, if that makes sense. Not in like what I mean by that is like that it doesn't really care about like the people. It's like they're operating in a space outside the people in a sense. It's like they're like the results really don't mean anything to them, right? Like after you graduate, we send you off and that's it.
I will.
And then and after that, like you're not linked in a sense.
Well, let me give you a little thought experiment. So I used to teach a class called Making Sense of Ourselves. I still do teach it. Now I teach it to a small, usually teach it to 20, 25 people, but I used to teach it to 200. Right? And so 200, mostly freshmen, all arrayed in tiers, right? Go. And you know, if you say something amusing or funny, everyone smiles, right, or laughs. And what do you notice? They all have great teeth. Go to Europe and look at people's teeth, right? And what you see is the results of not everybody having orthodontia and so on in there and wearing braces in there, as like people have. Eccentric, like mine, they're eccentric, right? They don't all fit together nicely in the way that your teeth do. Yeah, look at them. Great American teeth. Everybody recognizes them right away. Right? You don't have to do anything. They just think American. Look at those teeth, right? Okay, now let me give you. Here's the thought experiment.
I'm so sorry.
Right. No, you'll be embarrassed. Yeah, you'll be embarrassed. Yeah, yeah. Aristocratic Japanese ladies dyed their teeth black. You might think about that. I don't recommend them. Yeah, I know, it just sounds awful, doesn't
Why?
it? Yeah, they do.
But why?
Why? Why do people do anything? I mean, just think about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But now wait, here's the thought experiment, right? So think how much money your parents spend on your dentists, right? And then next step is how carefully you choose and train dentists and how much you pay them. Okay? Now roll it over, right? Think, how much do they care about your souls, your psyche? And how much care do they think in choosing the people who will make your souls, the teachers that you will have in school? And how much do they pay them? And then ask yourself, why is it the way it is? It's very simple. I mean, you roll it back, to when I was a kid, for example, and then earlier. Teachers had high social positions. They were valued. The local teachers would be respected, looked up to. They had a good quality of life. Their incomes allowed them to live pretty well, roughly middle-class lives, right? And that's not true now. And very few people aspire to be teachers, right? Because teaching is a valued, right? But teaching is vastly more important than dentistry. And we could get by with far less good teeth, right? And there's certainly anyone who's set up to practice dentistry, who have the kind of training in a subject that someone who sets up to teach mathematics in a high school would be drummed out of the profession. I mean, it's not of course true in all high schools. Many of them math teachers are extremely well trained. But in many, you end up having to teach something you've never been trained in at all because that's what's needed. And then you have to, and that's not a recipe for success, yeah.
I know this doesn't pan out too well, but one could argue that if you're paying teachers shit, it's only going to be the ones who really care about the students that are going to teach. They're not doing it for the money.
It's a romantic idea, and it's true that's true for some. But, just try out, suppose you thought that about medicine, and you said, okay, you know what? No, only the people who really want to do it should do it, so let's pay them nothing, right? Notice that in a world like this, to be motivated by the old sense of a calling has massive economic downsides to it. Because as we've made everything more and more expensive and more about money. Not to have it puts you in a really bad social position. So even if you don't really care about the money that much, and you really do care about the hearts and minds of your students, and you really do want to do the best you can for them, right, you're going to have children of your own, a family of your own, cares of your own, you're going to get sick, you've got, the money talks loudly. And that's a problem that we have. That's that we can't dissociate these two kinds of goals, right? That's bad. And in a way, if we look at the research tells you what the biggest difference to a child's education is the quality of the teachers that we have. It's how good the teachers are. It's not some other, do they have audio-visual equipment? Is the school got a good gym? These things matter very little compared to how good the teachers are. Yes.
Just a cliche comparison, the best schools are in Sweden, Norway, Finland, and the teachers are paid really well there, and that's where education is.
And there are other, the other thing, I think the other one which is very different, you mentioned it, but you took it in a different direction than I would have taken it in. The thought is, what's a school anyway? What is it for? What is it supposed to be doing? And part of our problem in America, especially, has been the political function of schools, the idea that the goal of a school is to produce a good citizen or something like that, rather than, for example, a well-educated person. And the result is that